So welcome to today's webinar focusing on what your fertility policy should look like from a medical perspective. We're really happy to have you join. As I said, whether you're taking a small break or multitasking and listening to us in the background, we hope you'll find the next hour informative. So whilst I have your attention, I'm going to go through a few housekeeping points. As you are very well used to now, this webinar is recorded and will be circulated upon ending. So don't worry if you have to leave halfway, we will send you a recording afterwards. Or if you didn't make it, you will get a recording as well. Reminder that you can use the chat function to write comments, ask us questions. You can also use the Q&A, which if you want to be anonymous, make sure you tick the anonymous box. I know this is an AMA style fireside chat, so thank you to everyone who submitted their questions already. We've had loads of questions, but don't let that stop you to ask more as we're having the conversation in case that stimulates more questions in your brain. We're going to do a little bit of an introduction about the topic, and then there'll be plenty of time for the Ask Me Anything from the middle till the end. We're hoping this will take about 45 minutes to an hour, and we'd like it to be as interactive as possible. So please do interact with us, whether it's an emoji reaction or you have a question in the chat. Sometimes people ask me to repeat something or post a link. Feel free to do so. So as for me, I'm Celine Crawford, your Fertifa host for today with my colleague, Dr. Gidon Lieberman. I'll give him a minute to introduce himself later. I run the people side here at Fertifa. I'm extremely passionate about building inclusive and high-performing teams. Like many of us at Fertifa, I have a story with reproductive health. So you can say I've had some experiences with family forming. Hopefully I can give you some perspective on that. On the other side of the coin, I'm also a chief people officer. And so I've also experienced the workplace side of, helping support employees going through those journeys as well. So we're hoping for today to be a good conversation between Gidon and I. We have some banter, which we try to keep under check because we know each other quite well, but hopefully it can add a bit of lightness as well to the topic. If you are new to Fertifa, we are Europe's most comprehensive reproductive health benefits provider. We help employers like Meta, Sony, Lululemon support their employees through the entire reproductive health journey. Could be fertility, family forming, men's health, menopause, neurodiversity, you name it. We're here to help support and create more inclusive workplaces. And that's what today's webinar is all about supporting people through their family forming journeys. So finally, Gidon, to help educate us on this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by you today. Gidon is our medical director at Fertifa. He's also a menopause specialist, and we've done lots of webinars together, but can you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Thanks, Celine. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's got a bit of lunch. My name's Gidon Lieberman. I'm a consultant gynecologist and specialist in reproductive medicine and surgery. So that means I'm a consultant. I work in the NHS as well as with Fertifa. And since 2001, I've been mostly involved in reproductive healthcare as well as general obstetrics and gynecology. So I deal with people trying to conceive, people struggling with conceiving, the surgery, the technology associated with it, and also as part of that, the entire reproductive health journey, including the latter years of perimenopausal and post-reproductive health. So been a consultant in the NHS since 2006. It's a little bit of time, and I've been with Fertifa since its outset a few years ago. So it's been really good. And today we're talking about family forming and policies. And we're going to go somewhere on today. We're going to go somewhere. We've got some stuff to talk about. I've got some things to talk about. It's really great if people post questions about. You can talk about your family forming policy. You can talk about questions about your own fertility if you want to. I don't mind. It's all.
Thanks, Gidon.
Not a downfall. And Celine's telling me to get on with it. So, with no further ado, I'll hand back to Celine and we can start. But please post if you can.
Thank you. Yes, please do. Before we start into the nitty-gritty, we do love data at Fertifa. And so if you'll humor us, we will start with a poll, which I'm launching as we speak. The poll is formed of two questions. So if you take the time, a few seconds to answer, that'd be great. The first question is, have you ever considered implementing a fertility and family forming policy? And the second question, is introducing additional fertility and family forming support a 2025 priority? So I'll give everyone a few seconds to vote. We're about halfway participation. A few more seconds. So this is the result I'm seeing so far. So really good news on the first question of implementing a fertility family policy, pardon me. 25% said we already have one. So I think that's really encouraging. So if that's the case, please write what your policy is about when we're discussing this. I guess best practice, how has the policy changed over time, etc. Almost 70% have considered, but maybe not implemented yet, and a small percentage answered no. And at the moment, and hopefully we can change your mind after this webinar, we have 66% saying that introducing additional support in 2025 is a priority. No is currently at 34%, so let's see if that goes down at the end of the webinar. So thank you so much for participating. Right, so Gidon, let's get to basics. I think, what do we mean when we talk about family forming, especially thinking of all modern representations of family today? What does that involve?
Thanks. Thanks, Lean. I think that there is a key word that you use there, and that's modern families. And families have changed a great deal, hugely from what we're accustomed to in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we now look at families in all sorts of different ways. And it's really refreshing because no two families are alike, actually. So family forming may start with a couple just trying to conceive, a heterosexual couple just trying to conceive. It may be a same-sex couple looking to conceive and requiring donation of sperm, donation of eggs, or donation of embryos. And that may segue into medical issues which are preventing a couple from conceiving, such as problems with ovulation. It may be a couple that person requires advanced technology, IVF, ICSI. It may be a couple that require a surrogate. It may be a couple that really just want to move away from a biological route to forming a family and look to adopting and fostering. And very importantly, those people who actively decide not to want to have children, a very important group, and it's a group that's actually increasing in number. And I don't think we should exclude this from, because when you've got family forming, I think you should also have those people who elect not to have a family. Very important. So there's a really wide range of options for people. And when we think about frameworks, policies, guidelines for companies, then it needs to be flexible, adaptable enough to facilitate everybody's journey. And I think everybody's journey is the important thing here. So it's everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We'll talk about that in more detail in a little while, how your policy can be inclusive and also flexible. So what I heard you say is, obviously not every family forming journey will be the same. Amazing. Some people, couples, modern groups of families can conceive naturally, quickly, easily. So that's great. But for others, it may be more complicated or not a straightforward route. And so either it may take longer or it may require additional support, like you were mentioning, like going down the routes of IVF, ICSI, etc. So thinking about that, and obviously, Gidon, I know through your work in the NHS, but also working at Fertifa, speaking to our patients, you see many individuals and couples. What sort of impact can fertility challenges start to have on individuals when they are trying to conceive and, it's not going according to plan?
Thanks. So when people talk about it, the first thing that I think about when I see people is the people in front of me don't want to be there. They really don't want to be there. So when they were back in the day, when they were thinking about their futures and they were concentrating on contraception and their lives, they kind of never thought, or very unlikely to have thought, we're going to need to see somebody to help us have a baby. It's just going to happen. For most people, but obviously there's going to be exceptions to that. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is people don't want to be there. Nobody wants to go to a fertility clinic to speak to somebody about something that's really deep, personal. Reproducing is part of your core. It's your core thing as a human being is reproducing, and having to go and talk to somebody about that, it's like really emotional. It's really sad. It's really difficult. It makes people angry. It makes people defensive. It causes friction between relationships and partners and families and employers. Okay, so you've got to know that couples don't want to be there. Couples don't want to be there. And actually, it reminds me of some HR people I was talking to about, and they said, well, is it equitable that we give time, we give this stuff to people who can't conceive, and is it fair to those who can? I'm like, nobody wants to be in a fertility clinic. They're there because they need to be. So I think there's this acknowledgement that people are on this journey, not because they would not, they'd rather not be there.
Didn't choose.
Yeah, they'd rather it just happened.
Yeah,
So, and I think that's the first thing. People don't want to be there, going on a journey they don't really want to do. They just want a baby or whatever. And it's the psychological impact that I think, and everybody that's on this call should be able to say, I hear you're having a difficult time. I'm really sorry that you're having a difficult time. How can I help you? This is what I can do. But we understand that it's difficult and it's really upsetting for you, or likely to be upsetting for you. Obviously,
yeah.
it'll be a difficult time for me. I think that's that first acknowledgement that's important. And we can all just say, I understand you're having a difficult time. I am sorry.
Absolutely. That's such great advice, because a question we often get is, and we'll talk through the different versions or depth of support that we can have, is that, oh, we don't have a budget. Where can we start? And this is where you can start by having a policy. And in a bit, I will share our template for family forming policy, which you can use for your own company, and also by knowing how to at least create that safe space and understanding for someone to come forward and ask for help. So absolutely. So I hear a lot of people say, family forming doesn't follow office hours, right? Which is really important. If we think about the context of work, it takes time, it takes space, it takes energy. And I know you've mentioned the emotional impact of going through a family forming journey. What about the physical impact? Can you talk a little bit, for example, if someone were to go through an IVF cycle, what are some of the physical considerations that one needs to be aware of?
So we're jumping into IVF, but I kind of think it's applicable just to any sort of medical intervention or surgical intervention that a person might need. First of all, I mean, can't get away from the psychological burden of it. But then once we are manipulating hormones, there's two aspects. There's the physicality and mental aspect of the intervention. So what do the hormones do to the body and what they do to the mind? Um, but also, how is that going to interfere with their ability to work? So I think there's a couple of paradigms that we need to think about. In most phases of the sort of treatment process of medical intervention, there's a lot of emotions going on. It's the excitement of it. It's going to get to where we want to go. During the stimulation early parts of IVF, the female partner is getting injections and her hormone levels are going high, and generally that's kind of an okay feeling. Women like to have lots of estrogen. They kind of feel okay. It's excitement, proactive. We're taking control of this process that we've really just been disenfranchised from. We've just been disembodied, and we're taking control, and that's really going to physical. Now there may be some changes in weight, in fluid retention, flushing, maybe feeling a bit of nausea, but workable through. And then you come to the index event. It may be an embryo transfer, it might be a trigger, it might be A, B, or C. And that will have an association with it, and that is procedure dependent. So if we're going for IVF, like you asked, we're going to do an egg collection, and the patient will be unconscious for 20 minutes, half an hour. They're not going to be able to work obviously on the morning of the procedure. I always say you're not, it's like having really bad jet lag. You're going to need the afternoon off and maybe the next day. So there has to be some understanding of actually what that index event, and then there's after the event, what's going to happen afterwards. And it may be directly afterwards, like an embryo transfer. And physically you're going to feel fine. But then what happens? And if the treatment is successful, people put up with anything. Doesn't matter. Feel terrible, but I'm pregnant. It's great news. The problem comes when you're not pregnant and the hormone levels fall. So your physicality and its mental association decreases, and you've had the bad news. It's a double whammy. You're feeling low, bad news, and physicality. So you'll need some compassion, maybe some time off there. And people think, well, why do you need time off? You're just having a period, or you're just got an listen, it's much more than that. So it's the combination of the physicality from the fall in hormones and the negative results. So it's really treatment specific. But I think, and hopefully we can tease this out during today's conversation about generalisms of time that can or time and resources that can be allocated to it.
Yeah, that's really helpful, I think, because if someone hasn't gone through any of the things you've just mentioned, it really helps to understand from a medical perspective that things are happening, within the body, etc. And I think someone is also talking about the 2-week wait between, which is quite well known. I've gone through that. It's very difficult 2 weeks. So of course, it's very hard to show up at work in the same way. And I think it's important for companies to have reasonable adjustments. And you hit the nail on the head. One of the most common questions that people ask us is, how much time, how much leave, etc. So if you're happy, I'm happy to jump into more of the policy side of the conversation. So before you think about leave or allowances, etc., I think the most important thing to make sure of in the policy is that you have obviously confidentiality, right? So people are going through this journey, they might not want to share it with anyone really. Even sometimes sharing it with someone in HR or with your manager is quite a big deal. So maintaining confidentiality is really important. The second thing is really about the clarity, right? So what are you going to get through this policy? So when we think about fertility treatment, Gidon, and someone's undertaking a treatment, whatever, might be IVF, might be ICSI, or some of the things we've mentioned, what do you usually recommend in terms of leave or in terms of time off, let's say for an IVF cycle?
So I think that's really important, but just going back, I'm going to come back to that.
Okay.
I kind of think it's really important not just to focus on the nuts and bolts here of the how much time, how much money, but actually to the wider thing of actually how are we supporting people. And that's really important, specifically, especially when it's more challenging for a company to do the real ones of time and money. So I think it's the whole package that you're looking at. So I think the key to it, and trying to sort of corral this whole very difficult subject of time and money, is to use some key things in mind. And I use phrases like flexible policy, and you have to be adaptable. Has to be adaptable to the unique requirements of that individual. Okay, so yeah, I know that some companies will be sort of very didactic and say 10 days, 5 days, 0 days. And I know that other companies will tend to be larger companies, will be much more flexible in saying, well, you can just take time whenever you need to. But I think what is really important is to have a dynamic and flexible process that you can adapt to the individual. And so sometimes somebody might say, well, I don't need the whole day off. I don't want the whole day off because I don't need it. I need some time to get to the clinic, but I also need some time around the appointment because I've got to get there, but decompress after the appointment. So I've got to process what they said, what process the results, and I've got to get my head back in the game. I've got to get my head back in my work game, get my game face on, get my work face on, and just do it. And actually, my feeling is that if you give people enough time to move from to change the dial on their radio from being a fertility patient to being a worker, and you give them that time to do it, then they're going to get a better result rather than saying you got 50, you got like an hour and you've got to be back here, because then that individual's got to cram all her emotions and the time and the travel and the process and getting their work head on again. And so I think you just need to be flexible in saying, well, okay, have 2 hours off, or let's come back later when you're feeling a bit better, and then they know that they can start work again. However, if you're having an egg collection, you have to understand that person's not going to be there that day and probably not going to be there the next day. And you've got to be mindful of the fact that their head, as much as they love working for your company, their head is going to be on how many eggs they got, what's the fertilization rate, what's the embryo's going to, that's what's going to be consuming their thoughts. There's no point in giving them giving them duties that are that you need to be appropriate for what they need to do. That's what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. No, I completely hear what you're saying. I think it is very important to have an adaptable part of the policy. With my HR hat on, and I think also having gone through something similar, when you're going through these journeys, though, you're also worried financially, right? It's costly, you don't know how long it's going to take. And so from a policy point of view, it helps to have at least some guideline as to what you could take off, if it would be paid or not. Can you take it continuous, or does it have to be in one go? And it's quite difficult to predict. So I'll share the policy in a minute, but what I hear you saying is almost having a personal plan on top of that, where the employee has the flexibility to say, right, I'm going to need a couple of hours here. Can I work from home on that day instead of coming to the office? And just thinking more holistically around the time period of what might be happening. Am I kind of paraphrasing correctly?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the terrible or challenging things about fertility treatment is the unknown about how long it's going to take. And because one of the questions that I will often get is, well, how many cycles of whatever treatment will I need? Okay, I don't know. This is your chance of conceiving. I don't know if it's going to, and I'm not trying to be unhelpful. I'm just trying to be honest and saying, I do not know. And that's really difficult to sit with. That's like, I know that I'm getting anxious already just saying that, and it's not even about me, but I'm getting anxious saying it because I don't want to let people sit with unknowns and open-ended questions. So what's the answer to that? Well, you have to deal with today. You have to deal with today. You have to deal with this cycle of treatment. What's going on with that person right now? That's what you have to deal with. And tomorrow will be what it'll be, and you can face it then. And then how many times can this be used? You need to be flexible and open about it, because as soon as you're not flexible, as soon as you're not open, and as soon as you're not adaptable, things will squeeze out the side. People will be taking time off work and they will not be working well. So I think being adaptable and just working with today is the most important thing. And as you say, you just need to find an answer that's right for that individual, and it's tricky. And I think both me and you are skirting around the fact is that we can't give you an answer for how much time you need off, because there's a different answer for everybody. But I think it's just the acknowledgement of people will need time up, and you've got to be flexible and adapt it to their circumstance. That's the key.
Absolutely. And someone wrote in the chat as well, and I 100% agree. It's also, you might not be able to give the notice that you might usually want to give, because you just don't know when you're going to need the time off exactly, if you have to wait for your body to be ready. So I think what we're saying is you want a supportive workplace where you can have these conversations, where you have some flexibility to bring to the table and voice what you need. And again, what you need might not be time off. It might be flexibility. It might be information. It might be not working on a specific type of project. Let's say if you're client facing all the time, you might not be able to show up in the same way. Or for example, I might say I'm not ready to do a webinar if I'm going through a journey, or something might be triggering. So it's okay to have those conversations, and it's really important. I'm just conscious interest of time, so I want to open because we have quite a few questions, and I want to make sure we're covering them. So anything from your side, having worked at Fertifa and working, with patients that work sometimes at very small companies, sometimes at large enterprise companies, what do you think is the best practice? Not just having a policy, but creating a policy where people feel they can actually use the policy. So, creating that sense of leadership, buying, and kind of positive culture. What do you see as a positive experience from your side, Gidon?
I think two things, and just finishing up what we were last talking about, basically, is that I know and have experienced lots of people who love to work during their fertility treatment. They love to work because it takes their minds away from the internal dialogue chatter about their fertility treatment, and they can almost works almost meditative for them, because it just takes their brain somewhere else where they can focus on something else and get away from the chatter. So I think it's, although we're focusing on sort of being very flexible, I think we also have to understand that it's not the right answer for everybody. And some people, and I know lots of people, just love to get back to the office and just love to get back into their thing, love to get back into that Excel spreadsheet, because it's taking them away from whatever's happening in that other part of it. I think it's really important. So I think I think then you're asking me about what changes in. Oh, okay. So I think I understand what you're saying. So I think it all starts from the top.
Yes.
Okay. I think that there is a moral and professional obligation of senior people in the company to acknowledge that there are reproductive health challenges, and because they're not kind of aliens. 1 in 6, 1 in 7 of us have reproductive health problems and seek fertility. Those people, I'm using my hands. I don't know why I'm saying they're higher up, but because they're not. They're just other people. And that's right, they are just other people, and everybody has these health challenges. And it is a show of strength, not a show of weakness, to acknowledge that you can go through reproductive health challenges. Yeah, it will color your life, but everybody has. So I think the whole story starts with team leaders and leaders and leaders and leaders. Okay, not going down across. Everybody in the organization can talk about it, because every person here will know somebody who's had a reproductive health challenge. We all know people. So I think that's where it starts, and I think and that's free. Okay, that's free. That's an easy one. That's free. It's not going to cost you anything, to encourage people to talk about their journeys if they're comfortable. I think the other thing that is a real easy win here within a company is to have groups, if possible, closed groups, to talk about and to say, and it can be anonymous. You can just log on anonymous, and there's lots of very clever software, anonymous login, and just talk about it. I personally love a champion. Okay, people don't. I love a champion where you can say, listen, I'm going through treatment. I'm having a difficult time. Can I just download to you, or can you signpost me to somewhere where I can download? So you have these internal signposting, I need to know anything about fertility treatment. You can say, that's awful, having a difficult time. You just want to sit here for 10 minutes and not do anything, not talk, just sit. I'm good with that. Or you might signpost to an external resource, sort of more constructive support. So that's where I go. So I think it all starts with senior members of the team acknowledging it and saying, listen, we've got a fertility policy here. We've got to use it. We've got a fertility policy. It's here to support you in your journey so you're a better employee. And we all know people, and like you talk to somebody, say, oh, people, the stories are always the same. So somebody will say, well, we struggled to conceive. Oh, so did we, or my sister or my brother. We all have these challenges. So I think just talking about it, and the acknowledgement from the top, from the senior people in the team, is where it should start.
Wonderful. Yes. So to recap, so opening up the workplace conversation, signposting. Some companies have a fertility officer or fertility champion, employee resource group. So there's many ways in making sure that employees can be supported. And as you say, don't assume. We don't know what someone might need. So the first step is really opening that conversation. And speaking from my own experience, even though I had the same challenge twice, I reacted completely differently in each, journey, and I needed completely different things. So you're not going to know what you need until you're going through it. And so having that flexibility to help employees whilst they're going through it and being adaptable is important. So we're at the halfway point. I want to start the AMA. Before that, I did promise to signpost to our policy. So I will share that in the chat now. Please let me know if the link is not working for you. But fret not, we will share that again when we circulate the webinar recording. We have lots of questions, so I'm going to have to try and go through them, Gidon. But I'll start with maybe a little bit of a general question, which is as follows. I mean, we answered that a little bit, but this is the question. We don't have budget to pay for egg freezing or IVF. So this is an employer saying that there's no financial allowance.
Yeah.
Should we still have a fertility policy?
1,000,000,000%. So as I said, as I started with 1,000,000,000%, it's not, the first step is acknowledgement. Okay, it's just acknowledgement. And you can say in your policy, you're having a fertility journey. We hope it's successful. We are here to support you. And this is what we can offer you. And it may be very wide. But I think for me, dealing with people is people can more or less deal with the finances, actually. They will find money, sometimes more difficult than others, but they can find money. And maybe they can squeeze in appointments. But it's the acknowledgement that they want. They want to be acknowledged that they're having a journey and they want support. And inherent with that is the flexibility and adaptation that I was referring to earlier. So I think there's some, I'm not going to say easy wins, but there's some definite wins here. And I think the first thing is acknowledgement, because once you name your fear, it becomes less scary. And fertility people, in my experience, are quite worried, quite scared. They've got a lot of negative processing going on. So it's really just the acknowledgement of that. So it doesn't matter if you can't afford to pay for it. It doesn't matter if you can't give them lots and lots of time off. Just acknowledgement, saying we're here to support you and we understand.
Yeah.
And that might be enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think flexibility, as you say, something I didn't mention that I really want to make sure we talk about is also, what about partners, right? So for example, the policy, of course, should prioritize the individual going through the journey. However, should the company make allowances for someone whose partner is going through an IVF cycle because they might want to go to the appointment? What are your thoughts on that?
It takes 2 to tango, or maybe 3 to tango. Sometimes it takes 4 to tango in very inclusive families.
Don't know what kind of tango you're doing.
That's something about it. But I'm saying is that, if somebody's going through, I'm just gonna leave donor sperm and egg to one side, but I'm gonna come back to it. But for a couple coming through treatment, same sex, different sex, whatever, it's 2 of them forming a family. Okay, it's 2 of them forming a family. So of course both of them need to be included in it. Okay. Of course, because people contribute much more than their biology. Okay. And we can talk about equality in healthcare, but actually it's quite simple. And I think we're all of a mindset where we understand the importance of supporting each other in the process. And of course you need to. I think it's quite interesting about what to do with a person who is quote unquote without a partner, and what time allocations for if you're supporting somebody. I think it's more moot. My personal point of view is that if you can offer time off for a supporter as a supporter, then and a resource as a supporter, then do, because the primary individual will need support. So if you're going down to support somebody, from my point of view, it's just as important as if you're contributing some biology to that pregnancy, because if you're going through fertility treatment, whatever it is, you may find that you really need somebody. Of course, some people just sail through it, but that's actually the rare, that's not the common thing. So I think it's actually not just partner, but I'll also support it if you can, But I understand that's more difficult, but if you can, I'd like that one too.
And I think it might not be time off again, but it might be the flexibility to say, I need to be away for 3 hours from this time to that time, but I will be working maybe later or another time, or, it can mean different things for different people. I'm trying to bunch the questions as much as possible. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the financial aspect. So maybe we can help people. I think we talked a little bit about IVF. We haven't really talked about the cost of things yet, but let's say somebody did want to add allowances in the fertility policy. We have a question here. How much should we provide per employee? It's quite a difficult question. Obviously, at Fertifa, we have clients that will give, let's say, £1,000, can go up to £50,000. It really depends on the client, to be honest. But what would you say, Gidon, in terms of someone wanting to start somewhere, wanting to offer some financial help? How much should they provide?
It's a really difficult, and obviously an open-ended question.
Yes, I was hoping you would say that. I'm not looking for a number.
I mean, yeah. So it's actually how I think about it, and to simplify it in my own sort of mindset, is the pre-treatment costs, the treatment costs, and the post-treatment costs. That's kind of how I think it, and maybe that's one way you want to talk about it. I think that when you're talking about costs, and this is just from a bare bones sort of thing, I think you've got to be, and I think one of the, and I'm going to beat our own drum. I think one of the good things about Fatifa is that we check what people are invoicing, because we want, and I believe that everybody's money, it might be a private individual or it might be the employer's money, should be spent appropriately. And I think testing and investigations should be appropriate. And I think treatment should be appropriate. And the treatments should follow national guidelines. And I think you got to be careful about it and about how you spend your money. So at the very least, you could say, you need a GP referral to a clinic. You may say the clinic needs to be registered. You may say that the treatment needs to be appropriate as per guidelines. And if you don't know them, we're here to help you, guide you through that. But there are different ways of approaching it, and I think that it may be that you'll fund treatment, investigation, treatment, and post-treatment, or you don't fund any of it, or you give. Now, so when it comes to treatments, it's difficult because it's really just an open-ended book, and I actually feel really, my heart goes out to so many people about this, because one of the biggest fears about self or funded IVF treatment, self-funded private IVF treatment, you just don't know what it's going. You just don't know where it's going, and you don't know if it's just one cycle or a package of cycles, and there's loads of terms and people get bamboozled. Again, going to beat our own drum and say, come and talk to us, because we can decode it for you. We will explain what it means. So there's lots of options, and I don't know what the right answer to this is, and that means there isn't a right answer. That just means there's a variable amount of answers to it. And I'm sure some people, if you gave £5 or you gave £5,000, will be adequately received by the people paying for treatment, because one thing I can tell you about treatment is always more expensive than you think it's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. We have quite a few questions about policies, so I will try to wrap them up in one. So the first question is really around, of course, we don't know how much time it's going to take an individual, i.e. days off work, but is it helpful to specify a minimum number of days in the policy? So I can answer that, and then you can compliment me, Gidon. So in terms of what the work that we've done with companies, it is a good idea to have a minimum number of days, and it is a good idea to specify the number of days per cycle. You may also want to put, as a company, a boundary, let's say a maximum number of days per year that someone might go through. You may not, but we think it's best practice to do that, at least to help guide individuals as to what sort of paid leave that they might be having. Similar, another policy question, and then I'll go to you, Gidon, because you might have had experience, but let's say that, for example, you're dealing with people who work on the shop floor. How can we change policies where there's some scheduling required? How can we, still acknowledge essentially, the needs of the business, you're on the shop floor versus the needs of having to be at a egg retrieval?
So I think that's the job of HR is being between, isn't it? And it's that I'm not an HR person. However, you don't suddenly have an egg collection and you didn't know about it before. And generally in treatments, you have a general plan. And I think there are some things that are fixed in stone from a medical perspective, that is. And other things are more flexible. So, if you need a scan for an IVF and it's either 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock, it doesn't really matter that much. You can move it around, maybe in the afternoon. But if you need an egg collection at 9:30 on a Thursday, that's kind of when you need the action. So I think actually being using your policy, being adaptable to actually the specific circumstances is important. And as I was referring to before, is actually finding the right answer for an individual and actually saying, do you really need it all day? Can you just have like an hour or two? Okay, be understandable. But you should get a plan from the treatment center about actually when it's going to happen. Now, I think part of this is the fact that, and where we all struggle with this, is that it's a bit of a movable thing, and clinics will change appointments just because they do. And so you have to be adaptable to it. And I understand there are some things that can't be moved. And I think it's important to define with the individual, do you have to go at that time or can you go a bit later? If they say, no, I actually need to be there at that time and that's it, I think you have to listen. So again, but it is difficult. And I suppose the answer to the shop floor question is, if it's really going to, if you don't have the capacity, flexibility to allow for that, then you need to have a look at the wider time off and say, well, okay, you're going to need to take the whole day, and that comes out of your budget of days. And I'm sorry, but that's just kind of how it is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And as you say, and I think a lot of the questions that we're getting today are very specific questions. And of course, we could say one way or another, but at the end of the day, it will depend on your company, your culture, what sort of environment you have, what sort of budgets you have, what sort of allowances you have. Because another question we have here is, we are a UK-based company, and we have a query where someone wants to travel to a European country for IVF treatment. How should this be treated? I'm sure you get that a lot, Gidon, but yes, tell me what you think.
Okay, so I think what's important about it, and sometimes when we do these webinars about times and policies, I think that if I was a member of the audience, I say, well, they're just being too vague about it. I think what's important is we're happy to refine down a policy for you with your company for your specific requirements. And it's impossible for us to have like a blanket rule for everybody because that's not life. That doesn't how it works. So we are happy to work with you and to define some of these things down. So this very specific question about time, traveling to a different clinic, I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. I can tell you how much time they will need, and we could work with you on actually on refining the process and talking it for that individual and actually understanding and working with you and with that individual actually about how much time is off. And it may be, and I think it's fair enough to say, well, okay, if you're going to take, if you're, and this is just off the top of my head, yeah, we will grant you the amount of time it takes you to get to the airport and the costing. But actually after that, that's your time off, or the other way around.
Yeah,
You could say that, and actually traveling is part of your flexible leave allowance, holiday allowance, whatever, an average allowance, and there is an amount of time that we will give you as part of your treatment program. And what we would help the employer understand is actually, and the employee maybe, if they wanted, is actually, are there other avenues that they haven't explored about treatment more locally, and how have they ended up in this journey, and why, and just to try and support that employee as much as the employer in this, because they may not be aware of different options.
Yes.
Because our advice is advisory only. We're not going to make money out of telling them where to go. We're just going to help them make the right decision. So I think there's various answers to that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's really important because we work with clients closely in terms of the policies that they have. And yes, some policies might say that you may travel to a different country and we will cover X, Y, Z. And other policies will say, no, the only treatment you can have is localized. And so usually companies have a specific view on what they'd like. All we do is, help share the options and maybe also help share what other companies do. But again, it's very specific to the companies themselves. So we're at quarter 2. There's quite a few questions still, but I think I'll do 2 or 3 more questions and then we can wrap up. So still quite a few financial questions. So let's say that a company cannot give an allowance, is not in a financial position to support. What avenues are there for employees going through IVF or whatever it is in terms of, funding or getting help?
So I think so. You can answer that one on
No,
mine.
no, go for it. I mean, I was just going to talk about different plans that.
You start because I think I might have something different to say to you. You start.
Okay, cool. So what I was gonna say is obviously it's great when companies have allowances, and it's, the gold standard in terms of family forming policies, but it's not always the case. So some other providers, like Fertifa, for example, or other people in the market, like Gaia, for example, will help you fund that treatment through a payment plan, if your company isn't able to do so. And so there are other ways out there to be able to fund, because we do recognize that it is very expensive going through these reproductive health journeys. Is that what you were going to say, Gidon, or was it different?
Yeah, it is, and I think what I think maybe what they were asking is, well, what can they do? What can they provide other
Yeah.
other than financial and time? Okay, so there's the talking support they can do within the department or within and that might be a a champion. It may be somebody from HR, maybe just like somebody they can just offload to. It may be that you can provide them with resource to talking to a person. I don't want to hear anybody talking to me about AI counseling, by the way. Actually speaking to a real life human being, who's non-judgmental, who's just going to listen. I think that's easy, and I don't think it's expensive, and I think that should be available. I think flexibility in the workplace, scheduling, location of work, people working at home in different work environments. I think it's difficult on the shop floor, but I'm sure, and I'm not a shop floor employer, so I don't understand, but there must be ways of flexibly shifting people from different times to different shifts, to different locations, to different jobs within the shop floor to enable them in their journey. And what did you just end on? Because I was going to pick up on something. Can you remember what you ended on?
I ended just on kind of the payment plans and being able to, pay through your salary over a period of time.
Yeah, it'll
That's
rebound. It'll come back to me. There was something else, but so I think there's options there if you can't fund and let's face it, times are hard, and I think that budgets are getting strained. Now, we as Fatifa would love all our clients to have huge budgets, but we understand that's not going to happen. So I think if you're not good at it, it's understanding, it's support talking, outsourcing your talking, and scheduling and work environments. That all can be done.
amazing. Thank you so much. So we're almost at 10 minutes to 2. So before we end the webinar, I will launch a final poll if you'll allow me to do so. And I will ask a final question as well. So I'm doing that now. This poll is anonymous, so don't worry. So the final question, which I thought was quite interesting, and I'm just interested in seeing if you and I have the same answer actually. Should fertility time off be booked as sick leave, or should it have its own category? That is the longest pause I've heard. From you, Gidon. Did
Oh,
I lose
oh,
interest?
sorry. I thought you were. Oh
No,
yeah,
I
no,
was
I was just thinking when you were there, I was thinking, oh, and I was thinking we haven't mentioned well-being days. And
yes.
and I was thinking, oh, why haven't we mentioned that? I suppose that's cute. Talk about well-being days. So, well, sorry about that. So I thought you were asking the audience that one. So well-being days are a concept of there being days that aren't sick leave, that aren't annual leave. They're semi-urgent. They're for different things. And this concept of well-being days is something that could be used for fertility treatment. And I like the idea about well-being days because it's equitable. If you're not having fertility treatment, then it allows the perception that you can take time off for other reasons for your own well-being and development. And I like that. Now, I think the concept of well-being days uh is is great, and it may only be allowable in companies that have lots of resource. Okay. But when I was thinking about this, I thought that's actually not true. You can allocate 1 day in the year or 2 days a year as well-being days.
Yeah, you can have well-being days. I think also maybe from an emotional standpoint, you might just want to book things as other absence if companies don't want people to say it's for fertility, or let's say we're doing menopause, it's for menopause. That's another option. And it will depend on the company and what's best for them, really. But yeah, we have the concept of well-being days at Fertifa for sure. I think some companies are very transparent and open and want to show that people are comfortable booking, let's say, fertility days off, and others aren't. And so it will be very culturally dependent. Right. I promised that I won't keep people too long. So I think we'll close here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It was a great conversation as usual, Gidon. Thank you for all your medical insights as well as general life insights. As a reminder, the webinar will be circulated because we've recorded it. And so if you want to get in touch because we haven't answered some of your questions, please let me know as well. No issues at all. We always love to talk all things fertility, all things menopause, all things neurodiversity. So feel free. So thanks so much, Gidon, and thanks to everyone here. And bye from everyone at Fertifa.